Hey, so remember that Tales of Kenzera game that I talked about back in my video about Afrofuturism? Well, the game was published about a month ago, saw a peak of 90 players on May 5th, and has been slowly dropping off from that ever since. 90 players. Not 90,000, not even 900. 90 players. That was their peak. Now, it's not hard to figure out why. Anyone who looked at the Sweet Baby Inc. Detected Steam page can tell you why. The game was created primarily by Abubakar Salim, a video game developer and founder of Surgent Studios. Salim was born in England, but his parents are both from Kenya. His father was a software engineer for Xerox, and Tales of Kenzera's plot is largely about Salim's own grief with his father's death. For the most part, it's a genuinely heartfelt story, which was ruined by the fact that he hired Sweet Baby Inc. for consulting, which is why so few people are ever going to actually buy or play it. Now, why on earth would a guy with two parents from Kenya need to hire a company like Sweet Baby for consulting? SBI doesn't offer consulting on marketing or sales. For the most part, they like to stay in the shadows. And what could they possibly tell Salim about Kenyan culture to make the game more accurate? Salim still has living relatives in Kenya right now. He could ask them questions over the phone for free. He doesn't need to pay a company like Sweet Baby. Except, he does if he wants to receive ESG investment money for his game, and his game development company. At this point, many people already know that Sweet Baby Inc. is a pretty evil company. ESG, BlackRock, I could go into detail, but I have nothing new to add about these companies. If you really want to know more, I recommend subscribing to a VTuber named Kirsha. She's done an amazing job covering all of these companies along with DEI and Bridge, and you should definitely subscribe to her if you want more information. Just be ready for her to use lots of gamer words and similar humor. But the problem I have with how things have turned out regarding Tales of Kenzera is that Salim, who is no longer associated with Surgent Studios, paid for SBI consulting because he thought that was the only way to get investor money, and now his game is a flop, the studio he founded doesn't look like it's going to survive, and here's the kicker. Sweet Baby Inc. already has Salim's money. Boycotting the game does absolutely nothing to them, at least in the short term. Now, it's completely understandable for people to take a zero-tolerance policy towards anything woke, anything involving Sweet Baby, DEI, or any of these other toxic ideologies. Nothing good can come from evil people, even if it is a fun game or story. Do not give your money to companies like this, and as bad as it might seem for a game like Kenzera, which was trying to be a wholesome take on grief and moving on, it's perfectly reasonable to cut off all companies that hire SBI and their ilk for consulting. All that said, there is a smart way to go about all of this. While Kenzera was being ignored on Steam, Hades 2 came out and received flack for varying amounts of wokeness, particularly regarding the portrayal of some of the Greek gods and goddesses. Now, I want to get this out of the way. The portrayal of Hephaestus in a wheelchair has nothing to do with diversity. Ignoring for a moment the fact that disabled gods appear in a wide variety of myths all over the world, Hephaestus actually uses a wheelchair in a mirror image of the way he's depicted in the game, complete with a hammer and everything. This is an actual piece of Greek artwork, circa 525 BC. I don't want to hear any more complaints that gods don't have wheelchairs. Take it up with the classical era Greeks. People keep pointing to the manga/anime series Danmachi and comparing how the series portrays Hestia and compares it to Hades 2. And Danmachi's is unambiguously closer to the way that the Greeks portrayed her. Now look at Danmachi's portrayal of Hephaestus. Which one looks more accurate to the myths? The issue was never about accuracy, it was about aesthetics. Hephaestus in Danmachi is easy on the eyes. Hestia in Hades 2 isn't even easy on the furniture. And I'm curious if someone has made a mod where you get the Danmachi version of Hestia in Hades 2. But Hephaestus to the Greeks wasn't good looking. That was one of his defining characteristics in every version of the myths. And you might be thinking, well, why did the game choose the particular interpretation of Hephaestus where he's in a wheelchair to portray? Why not the ones where he rides a donkey, or where he can walk, he just has a limp? First of all, who cares? What does it matter which interpretation they go with? They're obviously not going to be able to capture all the mythic versions in one game, because some of them are contradictory. Second of all, this game mostly depicts gods in the form of PNGs. How do you show a limp in a still image? You can show a wheelchair, obviously, but given the limitations of the art form that they've been using since the previous game, how would you best depict that Hephaestus is crippled? So, complaints about Hades 2 based on the fact that Hephaestus is in a wheelchair are incredibly dumb. And I want to emphasize this fact because it's the main crux of this video. Making complaints like this makes you look dumb, and by extension, makes the people who are pushing back against DEI, etc., look dumb by association. Don't claim that gods cannot be disabled when there's a disabled deity in almost every mythology. Don't call it a cuck chair, even though Aphrodite was cheating on him. That doesn't make this the Sneeko chair. He actually had this in at least one interpretation of the myths. No, you should be upset about this depiction of Hephaestus because of the man bun. I'm serious. I can get over the fact that he's positively bodied, because it's not that uncommon for people who can't move easily to gain a lot of weight, but the man bun is another matter. Because the man bun is unambiguously an injection of California culture into a video game based on Greek mythology. Of course, this doesn't bother me anywhere near as much as the Lizzofication of Hestia, or the masculinization of Aphrodite. Her face was already slightly androgynous in the first game, but it was easy enough to miss. But with Hades 2, people who had previously attacked Stellar Blade because Eve was too attractive and conventionally feminine turned around and praised Aphrodite's design for being sexy and androgynous. This kind of hypocrisy is absolutely the sort of thing worth complaining about. First, it's deliberate, and we know this because the people behind the game have admitted it. Second, it doesn't have a justification in Greek mythology. There is no version of Aphrodite that was depicted as androgynous. There is a separate deity named Aphroditus, who is basically Aphrodite with male genitalia, who is exclusive to Athens. And you start to notice, if you really read into it, that all the weird, kinky stuff we associate with ancient Greece came from Athens, especially when their empire got too comfy and eventually decadent. Aphrodite also had an intersex child with Hermes named Aphroditus, and that's where we get the word hermaphrodite. Some versions even have Hermaphroditus and Aphroditus as the same god, but Aphrodite herself was always feminine. Hades 2 has been described as the kind of sexy we need right now, in direct conflict to the treatment of games like Stellar Blade. Sexiness in games is fine, apparently, if and only if it appeals to degenerate weirdos. No one respects a hypocrite. And that's another reason why I want people to be careful about why they start throwing shade at games, movies, books, and what have you. Getting upset when diversity clearly means remove all white people is perfectly fine. Getting upset when diversity means including a disabled person who already existed in the mythology is not fine. And the reason why is because, like the issue of sexiness in games, it's hypocritical. Here, let me explain. Imagine if there were a work of fiction depicting the Silk Road in China, and they decided to include Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant. Now, being from Venice in Italy, Marco Polo was white, at least by modern interpretation of what counts as white. And imagine a group of woke weirdos threw a temper tantrum because a game set in China included a white guy when it did not technically need to. A normal person looking at that reaction would call those people bigots, and they'd be completely justified since there's nothing wrong with including a historical figure that actually existed even if it isn't necessary to the story. When you complain about a video game choosing to include a version of Hephaestus in a wheelchair, you sound exactly like that. And when you get mad about justifiable inclusivity in one case but not the other, you're being a hypocrite. And you're making us normal people look bad by association. It would obviously be one thing if they rewrote the history of Marco Polo so that he has a much bigger role in such a story than he did in real life, which is why people are getting upset about the new Assassin's Creed game. Now, personally, I stopped playing Assassin's Creed after Rogue, because everything kept feeling more and more like Ubisoft was just trying to milk that cow to death. And there is a point to be made about making your protagonist be the one black guy in Japan's history, especially since he had very little written about him. He may or may not have been a slave or a mercenary for the Jesuits. We don't know his birthday or his exact age. He appears to have been in Japan for a total of 15 months, and during that time served as a retainer for Daimyo Nobunaga. Anything outside of those facts made about Yasuke can no longer be described as historical or educational. And it is pretty obvious that the reason Ubisoft is doing this is purely for politics. And it's totally responsible to boycott any work of media that makes it expressly clear that they are only including a character as a shameless act of pandering. Of course, an even more responsible reason to boycott the game is that it's going for $70 to $130. But there's a problem here. One of the more common complaints I keep hearing about new works, even good ones like Blue Eyes Samurai, is that as soon as there's a protagonist who's not white, or a strong female character, the gut reaction a growing number of people have is to assume that the show will be woke garbage and they won't even give it a chance. Now, I completely understand why it's come to this. Pattern recognition is the source of all stereotypes, after all. But you know that you're missing out, right? When you refuse to engage with genuinely good media because of the demographics of the characters, whether it's a woman protagonist, or a black guy, or a guy in a wheelchair, you're only hurting yourself and the people who are trying to make good media. And the funny thing is, we could use some genuinely good media featuring protagonists from different walks of life. Not too long ago, Asians were considered diverse. Before the term BIPOC was coined to specifically exclude Asians and Jews. An Assassin's Creed game set in Japan with a Japanese protagonist who was native to the culture and the environment is something that fans have wanted ever since the first Assassin's Creed game came out. And for it to finally come out and have the protagonist be the one guy we sort of know from history to take part in Japanese military who wasn't native Japanese, that's pretty disappointing. Like, imagine if they made the main character one of the Jesuit missionaries themselves, or one of their white servants. You'd be just as disappointed, except that the woke crowd would be mad too. Also, notice what a break this is from other Assassin's Creed games. In every other Assassin's Creed, you played someone who wasn't famous from history. He occasionally encountered famous people, but you also got the sense that the assassins were actively trying not to become too famous, because that's the whole point of the cloak and dagger stuff. The use of someone from real life actually clashes with the established lore of the franchise, and you might not have noticed that, but your brain did. So to recap thus far, we have very good reasons to be upset with some of the woke games coming out lately, including Tales of Kinzera, Hades 2, and Assassin's Creed Shadows. There are good reasons to be upset, such as involvement with Sweet Baby Inc., uglifying Hestia, giving Hephaestus the man bun, gooning over Hermaphrodite, and pandering to one race at the expense of another, making it clear Asians don't count as diverse anymore. But there are also bad reasons to be upset, such as getting mad that one guy who had a wheelchair in one version of the source material has one now, or the inclusion of black and female protagonists in games that are not deliberately woke. And the reason why it's important to point these things out, first, we can't be adopting the worst traits amongst the woke crowd. We can't become bigoted ourselves. Part of the reason why people don't like the way the woke crowd hates white people is because it's the original definition of racism. Don't let the excess of poorly written black and female characters make you assume they're automatically bad just because they tick the boxes. And if there's one thing about wokeness that's worse than the racism, it's the hypocrisy. Don't adopt that trait either. But the third reason is that when a piece of media tries to deliver a good game or story, or whatever, and they just so happen to have a character who would check the boxes, don't throw them in with the woke garbage without good reason. It's not enough to boycott all of the garbage media out there. You also have to reward the stuff that's actually trying to deliver to the customer what they actually want. Now, there is, of course, a new problem when it comes to media. The fact of the matter is that the tide appears to be turning against the woke. Culturally, as people just aren't tolerating it in their games and shows. Legally, especially now that the Supreme Court in the US has struck down affirmative action, and white people are actually winning lawsuits over the issue. And economically, as the ESG money is starting to become a poison pill due to the conditions they require for investment money. And depending on how things go in November, things might even turn against the woke politically. And as a result, they're going into hiding. Companies are trying to stop consumers from identifying which ones have ties to consulting firms like Sweet Baby Inc., including Ubisoft, where the involvement of SBI on the new Assassin's Creed game has been exposed rather recently. But the problem is, the woke mafia aren't going anywhere, even if they are forced into hiding. As the saying goes, evil doesn't sleep, evil lurks. So, gamers, and some other connoisseurs of entertainment like the Warhammer 40k crowd are being vigilant, striking while the iron is hot and are on the hunt for woke toxicity wherever it may hide. And I'm grateful. Say what you want about gamers, but they're the main group of people in society to unite, across countries and cultures, to stand for something they believe in. And that's admirable. But there's been a lot of friendly fire, too, and I don't think people understand how important it is to cut that out. When it comes to a game like Tales of Kinzara, as sad as it is, I think gamers in refusing to buy it made the right call. With a focus on Kenyan mythology that didn't involve stealing other cultures, and a heartwarming message about dealing with grief, it would be nice to see more games like this. But as much as I would like it to succeed, a message needs to be sent. You don't hire companies like Sweet Baby and expect anyone to buy your game. Sweet Baby Inc. is a poison pill, and even if you only take that pill so you can get some of that ESG investment money, it won't be worth it. The situation with Supergiant Games is even more peculiar. As of writing this, no association with any woke consulting companies has been detected, but there's no way they did some of these designs purely because they thought it would be a good idea. Take a look at the Don Machi version of Hephaestus again. Can you think of a reason why the creators of this manga would redesign a male Greek god to look like this? Perhaps to sell more merchandise? Or to get more people to buy the DVD when they see her on the box art? Or maybe they did it for no reason other than the fact that they thought the audience would enjoy seeing an attractive, curvy woman with an eye patch. Now look at Hestia, as depicted in Hades 2. Do any of those reasons explain why she's now fat and inexplicably has the same skin condition Michael Jackson had? Notice how Apollo has been race-bent to be a black person as well, but he's neither fat nor suffering from a melanin deficiency? That kind of double standard doesn't just appear from nowhere. And unlike Surgeon Studios, who are just starting out, Supergiant Games is a big enough name that they have a reputation, one they might be worried about losing. They're still relatively small, but every game they've developed up until this point has been a hit. Even Pyre, which most people agree is their weakest game, is still well liked by a lot of people. And some gamers, including me, still play Bastion today because it was so good. So, if they don't need ESG money, then maybe Supergiant Games didn't need to hire a consulting company like Sweet Baby. But here's the thing. If you work for Supergiant Games, you want that on your resume. Which means people are going to start noticing which projects you worked on. And their company is based out of San Francisco, with no other offices anywhere else in the country. They're surrounded by a culture that doesn't take too well to historically accurate portrayals of European history. How do you think the people of San Francisco would react to a game like Hades with a purely feminine Aphrodite and an all-ethnically Greek cast, with no gay romance option? If Supergiant makes a game and it doesn't appease the woke crowd, they can figure out pretty easily who worked on it. Easy to dox, easy to swat. Easy to throw a Molotov through a window. Remember what kinds of people we're dealing with here.
Put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
If I worked for a company in a place like that, I'd thank them for the time we'd spent together, hand in my resignation, and move to another state. Probably back to Michigan since I like the cold. But the problem with that plan is that if I were a professional game developer, I wouldn't want to quit my job carved out of a niche that was frankly a miracle to get as far as it had, only to have nowhere to go to find new employment. Remember, Sweet Baby's main weapon is to threaten people into hiring them. We can threaten to not buy games from companies that engage with companies like this, but if we really want to make any kind of progress, we can't expect to have a gaming industry that produces good entertainment if both sides are only wielding the stick. We need to offer a carrot. And that carrot needs to be the promise that people who make independent games and don't hire companies like SBI or try to sneak in woke ideology can count on our support. I've heard a lot of people saying the AAA industry is dying. Now it's time we actually vote with our wallets. But hold up. How do we avoid buying games that secretly have connections to woke ideologies? I almost fell into that trap with Kinzara, and that was before SBI started trying to hide what they were up to. But there are a few things we can do. First, stop pre-ordering games. Pre-ordering games made sense when people were trying to buy physical media, and copies were limited. And if you are still buying discs for your games, then by all means, pre-order games if you think it makes sense. But here's a funny thing. Companies really liked it when people were pre-ordering games because of a little something called the time value of money. Simply put, money acquired in January is more valuable than the same amount of money acquired in June because you can invest money in January and collect interest by June. Big gaming companies have been cashing in on this nice little benefit of pre-ordered games for years, and so they never stop promoting it. That's why they still use it today. But it clashes heavily with the second thing we need to do, which is to be patient. When a game comes out, don't just click that purchase button right away. There's a veritable buffet of YouTube channels out there who will not only critique games, but play them on stream, where you can get a pretty good idea of what they're like before you buy. Subscribe to channels like Kersha, if you don't mind her humor. Check out those Steam reviews. Don't just count the thumbs up versus the thumbs down. Read what the reviewer actually said, especially the negative ones, and that little box that tells you if the reviewer got the game for free, or was in any other way incentivized to leave a positive review. Third, look for free demos. A lot of games today have things like this. If it does, give the game a test run before you buy. Don't count on Steam refunds. Too many consulting firms have gotten clever enough to hide their influence far enough into the game that you won't find them in the 2-hour refund window. But demos are a great way of getting around that. And finally, when you find a game that's good, or bad for that matter, let other people know about it. Spread the word about good indie games that you manage to find, and that brings me to today's featured game. The Land Beneath Us is a turn-based roguelike in which you're initially told you're playing as a robot, raiding hell to collect souls to power the new soul tech. What you're not told right away is that the version of the afterlife you're plundering is actually based off of Welsh mythology, and features creatures like the Nuclevi, Afanc, and figures like Arun and Hafgan. The game has a free demo available on Steam, but I had so much fun with it I couldn't resist buying the full game immediately. And if you want to read a book full of pre-Islamic Middle Eastern mythology, you can check out my book, Heroes of Janan, The Science of Magic, with its sequel coming out soon. Alright, that's all I have for you today. Hit that like and subscribe button, and thank you, and goodbye.